Hi, Conduit. This week, we started a brand new sermon series called Misquoted. We're talking about some commonly misquoted passages from the Bible. The Bible is a big book. It's got a lot of different things in it, and it's a pretty complicated book at that. And so it's not surprising that the Bible is often misquoted. And it can be misquoted in a number of different ways. The one way is the thinking that one thing is in the Bible that's not actually in there, right? I think one of my personal favorite examples is the saying that whenever God closes a door, he opens another one. That, I think, as far as I know, is from The Sound of Music. And so that's one way of misquoting the Bible, by thinking that something's in there that's not actually in there. And the second way, which I think is maybe a little bit more common, is taking a passage of the Bible, maybe it's usually about one verse, and sharing it or talking about it in such a way that communicates that we don't actually understand what that passage truly means. It's more of a misunderstanding of the passage when we quote it. And so my hope for this sermon series is for us to grow in our understanding of how to read the Bible well, how to share it with others well, and really gain some skills on talking about and studying the scripture for ourselves. This week, we dove into probably one of the most commonly quoted or misquoted Bible verses that I know of, and that's Jeremiah 29:11. It's a passage you may have seen online. It's a passage you may have seen on a mug or in a Christian greeting card. And this passage says, in Jeremiah 29, it says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope in a future." And it's a very encouraging verse. Now, we talked about how sometimes that verse, especially when it's read all by itself and put maybe onto a picture or onto a mug or into a card, it's a very good wish. It's got great intentions, and I think God does have good plans for us, good intentions, and does want to see us do well. But I think that verse is really saying something very different when we look at it. As we dug into the passage and as we just read the verses that are right next to it, verses 10 and verses 13 and 14, what we begin to see is that God brought his people into exile. We were talking about this a lot in the minor prophets that we were discussing. But God sent his people into exile, and he has not so much he has different priorities than that verse might first lead us to believe. God's first priority is not for his people to prosper, but for his people to follow him and him alone. And that remains true for us. God absolutely does want us to do well, but our comfort, our prosperity, things going well for us is never guaranteed, and it's not God's highest priority. And we looked at this passage, and then we looked at another passage in the New Testament, Romans 8:28, another often quoted passage that maybe isn't always fully understood. And we saw from that passage that God works all things, good and bad things, to the good of those who are called according to his purpose. And that good, that all things, good and bad things, are worked towards, is a purpose that we can't even completely comprehend. We see that it's a glorious purpose. It's a purpose of transforming us, our hearts, ourselves into more resembling more like Christ. But we can't even completely comprehend that. And so we began to talk about how God's highest priority is more our heart and less our comfort, less our prosperity. And so God is always absolutely clearly in the Bible present in our suffering, and he's also doing something in our suffering. So God is always with us in the middle of our suffering, is always doing something in the middle of our suffering as well. We don't always know why we experience suffering. We don't have that answer. We're not guaranteed that answer, but we are guaranteed that God will be with us and that God won't waste what we go through. So this week, I hope as you dig into this passage and some of the Bible study tools that we talked about and lean into this truth, that you have a fruitful and encouraging discussion, that you are able to encourage one another through the different things that you're going through. We are Christians not because we have it all together, but because we know we need Jesus, because we don't have it all together. And so I hope that we can be a community that supports and cares for one another. Conduit, I hope you have a good rest of your week, and I hope to see you this next Sunday.